Welcome back to the Camper Machine Podcast. Today we have a webinar replay that was done in conjunction with the Camp Stack, where I walk through exactly how to think about integrations as a modern camp, looking at connecting Campminder data through the use of an API with the Camp Stack. My name is Eric Wittenberg. I'm one of the co-founders of the Camp Stack. Today we're going to talk about Campminder integrations, what's possible with the Camp Stack, and some of it even without. We'll kind of cover some of the detail there. These are the three sort of logos you'll see here today. So in addition to founding the Camp Stack with Carl, my partner who's on the call. Hey, Carl. There's a team of, I think we're like 10 people now. Carl, if you're, you can chat me if it's up to you. So we have Henry's on the call supporting us from the other side of the world over in Nigeria. We have tons of engineers in Nepal and all sorts of far-reaching places. And so the Camp Stack is kind of a global team of engineers that are helping focus and just build integrations and a platform where integrations can be built. So that's what we're really talking about. Camper Machine is what I do now in conjunction with the Camp Stack, where we build marketing automation. We have a platform kind of like a HubSpot, but it's, I think, simpler and more affordable than HubSpot. So that's why I build out automation for camps. And that's how the Camp Stack kind of came to be. And obviously, if you're here, you're probably a Campminder user, maybe Campminder employee, or maybe one day will be a Campminder camp. And so I've been using Campminder for 20 years. So I've seen the days, where Dan would have his computer fixing things, live at a conference. And now where we are, many years later, Campminder is, has unleashed this API, and there's a lot of interest and wonder about how to use it and make it work. And that's what we're here to discuss. So I just wanted to kind of level set here and launch a little poll to see where you are at with your integrations. I want to make sure everybody is here for the right reason. And if there's any change in what we need to talk about, I'm happy to adapt. So just go ahead and click through it. I want to make sure you're on Campminder, what kind of program you're running, and if you currently are leveraging, the API for any sort of function. If I'm thinking, have you tried it and it's been successful, tried it, been not successful, or you're a little timid or haven't gotten there yet. So I'll leave that open for another second. Thank you for sniping through that really quickly. I see there's a couple of questions coming up here. Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. So so I'm going to end that. Looks like almost everybody's gotten through that. So it looks like, and I'll even share it with y'all. It's okay. So there's some people on campsite missing the P. Okay, so everybody's in the right place. Great. And some day camps, some overnight, some retreats, some year-round. So I'll try and pick a case study that, when we talk about it, will make sense. I'll kind of focus on day a little bit, but we'll see. It's not a huge, overwhelming majority there. And so you currently have this is a good mix. Some people are happy, some people wish there was more, and some people haven't gotten there yet. Cool. So that's helpful. So thank you for that feedback. So a little bit about how we're going to get things going here. I'm going to cover some topical introductory stuff. Now that I know most of you have played with the integrations, I'll make it kind of very specific to that. And so there's really 3 acts here. I'm going to cover basic stuff. I'm going to cover the way I think we need to be thinking about integrations. And then I'll show you how it looks inside the Camp Stack. And so just to be clear, there are some limitations once you're with Campminder. Is everybody on, if you're not on standard, I'm sorry, if you're if you haven't upgraded from standard to professional, you don't have access to the API. So this might be something you're curious about. So we'll kind of cover that. It looks like nobody here is really, I guess, a campsite person might be Minder curious. If you are, Josh is probably the guy to talk to. Josh, if you drop your, contacts in the chat, I'll kind of pull that up there at the end for you. Josh works for Campminder and is sitting on the call. So these are the basic kind of things that you have to know. Got it. Got it. All right, thanks, Jaren. That's good. Good to know what you're talking about there. So if you're not playing with an API, if you're not on professional, but this is what's kind of how to think about that if you are. So one thing that's really important to think about if you're learning about API management, or thinking about how or why there are sticking points in this. There are different types of users that are going to be dealing with the API. So the owner operator person often is the person that signs the contract for the Campminder contract and terms and all of that, but they are not often the admin registrar that actually lives inside Campminder and controls line items. And a user is more like program director person that might be leveraging Campminder. And then sometimes there's a manager API person. I was talking to one camp recently that had they have like a ropes person, a ropes, outdoor adventure person that happens to build, be an IT person and build APIs for people. Right, Josh says, and so whichever one you are, as you think about what to build with an API, you should be thinking about the other roles. And so we'll just come back to this, and I'll reference camp user types. Which type of person are you? Because you'll often have to make the case for what you want to do with one of the other people. And sometimes it's not necessarily what you might be thinking right now is, oh, I have to pitch to the owner operator or my partner that we have to pay more for something. Oftentimes, I think that the harder case of persuasion with user types around APIs and integrations and new technologies is the users and registrar people that have been doing things a specific way for 1, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So it's just a thing to consider. We kind of addressed this if we've tried the API stuff already. If you're a super genius, give me 1 second, email. Somebody's locked out. So if you're a super genius and you've done this already, then you probably are not going to learn anything new, but you'll feel really good about what you're doing. I'm not going to go into the deep dive of what is an API and how does it work. The general overview and the case study I'm going to walk through is an example of how an API works. Is it's an application program interface, and you're probably thinking that it's very easy or should be very easy to take data from one place, i.e. Campminder, and send it over to a camper machine or an email marketing tool like MailChimp or Constant Contact or HubSpot or something like that. And so this is how we conceive of, two pieces of software, and it ought to be easy to get, the data to flow from one to the other. In reality, you may have manually moved over a spreadsheet worth of data, and that probably you've experienced some pain and kind of brain damage of banging your head against the table, doing the same spreadsheet migration and exporting and manipulating it. But in reality, an API allows you to do a lot more, where you get to focus on, making this a straight line, but letting the camp stack or an API do a lot of the work for you. So this spreadsheet has a lot of rows, this is a figurative spreadsheet here where we want to make this a straight line for the experience of the user. And so what the camp stack is doing, and what, when someone else is building an API for you, the go between the data that you want to pull and what you want it to look like in somewhere else is done by a third party managing the API. In this case, we're talking about the Camp Stack. But even if you have somebody on your team that's messed around with you doing it yourself, that's what you're doing. You're playing this intermediary. Now, the endpoints is what Campminder has exposed. So they have tons of data that they have pulled and exposed in order to make all of this possible. And they've done a great job laying it out. Maybe Henry or somebody can post a Q&A with the link to Campminder's documentation on it if you're really curious to go looking. But unless you are really interested in becoming a programmer, it's probably not going to be a worthwhile use of time. Um, this is definitely something that's very technical. I have a moderate technical background-ish. I've played with a lot of things, and I retired from this when I met Carl and decided this would be better left for him. So as an example, I'm just going to walk through this. There's a program called Postman that Carl and the engineers and anybody that's trying to pull API calls and requests is going to go to. They're going to basically use a whole different language of managing JSON requests to pull data and pull various things that kind of connect to each other. So this is a season that you're pulling for a specific camp. You have to run that request to get a specific season, and then you have to get additional details on the attendees. So when you think of an API, you think of an information highway like that straight line, but really it's never like that. There's a lot of hidden columns in that spreadsheet where you have to unlock and unfold things. So even after you get specific attendees, you have to get specific sessions. And this is just to figure out what you're trying to pull out of Campminder. And so these technical steps are, for most people, not really where their highest and best use of time is. And that's really why we have been building the Camp Stack as a platform to make it easy for people to say what they want to get out of Campminder and where they want to take it and push it down the line, just to see what's next. Um, is anybody, I want to pause here. Is anybody, can you ask a question if you already have a connection to from Campminder to something specifically? I'm just curious. I want to see. I suppose I should just enable chat, huh? Does anybody have uh does anybody have a connection left? Dennis says no connections. We're working towards that. Pro suite. Okay, got it. Thank you, Dennis. Ben says connection from Campminder to Constant Contact to add users to mailing lists, which kind of works. Okay, Ben, that's perfect. Thank you for volunteering. I'm gonna show exactly, that's exactly the use case that we. So Abby says we have a Zapier account. We'll get into that. It might be, we'll discuss that. So in Ben's case, I would say Ben has a rudimentary integration where he's figured out how to pull the probably email address, maybe first name of a parent, and drop them onto a list in Constant Contact. So at least his monthly, newsletter that he sends out to anybody that's ever been enrolled is up to date without him having to export it from Campminder, which is like, that is a huge benefit. Way to go, way to get started. The reason why I had a bee in my bonnet about this and have kind of altered the course of my professional life once I met Carl was that when I was a camp director running camp, I would have all these automations running, and I actually sent an email that was automated to a dad who was on vacation in Paris while his daughter was finishing up camp in the Berkshires, and it said, Anna's gonna love it next year. And he wrote back, I hope so, comma, but isn't she still there? Question mark. And so she had extended, and the data didn't sync up to the right list in MailChimp. In this case, this is like eight or 9 years ago. Uh, and so this is the danger with these sort of like simpler integrations. They're hard to keep up with. So I'm going to keep walking through a little bit more about how to think. And so this is really that example and what I think might be happening occasionally for people like Ben, is that this is the number one use case, partially because I came from the world of being a director who was in charge of sales and building out automation. The number one use case, I think, for camps and most small businesses is what we call a camper sync workflow. And so what that looks like is oftentimes there's a CRM tool where you might be managing lots of leads before you have their addresses and phone numbers to put them into Campminder anyway. And you're pushing them to apply. You want them to apply. You want them to start filling out the application and save it as incomplete. You want them to do anything. So you're trying to get them to go there. And then they actually apply. And then now you have this disjointed, like two timelines in the Spider-Verse where you may have automation firing from your email tool saying, please keep enroll now. Did you know our dates and rates are available, etc. And they just got the email from Campminder, the transaction email saying, we ran your deposit for whatever dollars and thank you. And so this is the now what? This is the, oh boy, how do we fix this? And so the way that we fix it with the Camp Stack is that when the user takes action in Campminder, it's going to be through either an application status is changed to applied or enrolled. And we take that moment, that triggering event in Campminder, the Camp Stack pulls the information out, all of the information that we tell it to from Campminder, and then we send it back to Camper Machine to update the accounts and the automation, so that our point of truth is the technical term here is Campminder, and we're updating Camper Machine or whatever the email tool is off of that. So whether it's Bloomerang for fundraising or Constant Contact, we want to make sure that when Campminder has an update, we take the right information and send it back to whatever tool we use for influence. And so why do we want to do that? Because if someone has enrolled and you keep telling them they should enroll, you kind of look foolish. And that's not exactly a great first look for being a trusted source of leadership and running camp. Because, and I did this, I feel kind of bad about it to this day. We had at Berkshire Soccer, where I was the founding director with my wife, and we started from scratch. I had like these promo codes that I would be sending out. And so if somebody enrolled on Friday and I didn't sync up until Monday, they probably were getting an email saying, you know what, it's been 3 weeks. If you enroll now, I'll give you an extra $300 off or something silly like that. And so I'd get these emails forwarded to me over the weekend, and then I'd have to go give that person a discount. And if you've ever been at a camp where $300 matters, you know that kind of burns. And so this was really the genesis. We need to be able to stop lead communication if it's scheduled to go out and someone is enrolled. Additionally, there's a lot of details and nuances. So Ben, this is what's probably missing in your kind of more basic flow of pulling the contact, putting them in constant contact. There are a ton of hidden columns. Back to that spreadsheet with the two kind of start and end points revealed. There's a ton of different points you can pull from. So are you pulling P2, F2, and Ben, right, like that? You know, for each of these 4 adult users, it's actually 16 fields, because you're going to pull first name, last name, email, and phone number, likely. So to set up a workflow that and you likely only have one lead parent that's doing the correspondence in an email tool, that one person that's doing the chatting with the director and asking their questions. But then when they apply, they could have, you know, they could have remarried and now and their ex is remarried and now there's four parents that could be guardians and up to four kids that you might want to have that data reflected and go deeper. So I'll get into this a little bit more, but this is what's included in a camper sync where the camp stack pulls and manages those hidden fields for you. Uh, that session data that I alluded to with for each camper, that allows, for camper machine, a lot of people want these deeper automations. I understand some of you, if you've gotten a kind of a rudimentary connection to MailChimp or Constant Contact or something like that, you're just happy to have the list be updated for the season. And that's great. Oftentimes what will happen though is after you achieve that, you'll be thinking, gosh, now I can fire some form of automation because this is what the world is capable of now. And really, the business world was capable of this 15 years ago. But the cost of competitive software like Salesforce has now come down to earth. So camps can leverage this. And so if you had that basic integration and you could nest into those hidden columns, whether the family is new or returning, you could send different communication to different families on an automatic workflow. So that is all possible inside of a camper sync. So I want to pause and kind of enable a little bit of dreaming. There's definitely a lot of similar to how when ChatGPT and AI has kind of exploded over the last year and a half. You could spend a lot of time getting silly poems in the form of Dr. Seuss from ChatGPT about your spouse and your siblings and your people you want to make laugh. And that's fine. However, there's a case for thinking of what should we build with integrations, because oftentimes people will be very curious about this deep, nuanced workflow or integration that, they want to get their swim levels and connect it to camera that's watching the pool and tell them how many days they checked in. So just because you could connect something doesn't necessarily mean you should connect something. And so one perspective on this is to think about which user that we'd mentioned that runs camp, is involved in registration, or follows up with families. Which user has a specific pain point? So in the absence of what I call a post-enrollment follow-up or a post-purchase workflow, there's probably an admin that's doing a lot of clickety-clack work to say, give me all the people that have enrolled this month and send them the welcome to camp one and they're like a master at managing the Boolean fields. But you have this really highly skilled, culturally fluent person on your camp team that is spending a lot of their time doing clickety-clack work that could be automated away. And so think about what that person could be doing if they were spending more time on the phones explaining things or whatever the possibility might be. So thinking about user type and their pain point. So I want to pause here for a second. Does anybody have any of these where they're existing and they're thinking, gosh, this has been a problem for my camp for 3 years. I need X, Y, or Z, be it a day camp transportation thing. I saw a bunch of day camps. Does anybody have this problem for school bus routing, check-ins, things like that? Okay. Okay, no specific questions. First, if you need help dreaming, I can dream with you. I put a million dreams here because I may or may not watch The Greatest Showman quite a bit. The last thing I'll add here is that when you're thinking about what should you build as an integration, I really like to look 5 years out and work backwards. There is a slew of college graduates, recent graduates, people that are on staff seasonally, that are going to be on staff full time, that are not scared about this and expect this level of connectedness. And so in 5 years, it's going to be very normal for people to be asking for specific integrations, and they will think creatively like this. They will think, why are we doing this thing over and over and over again? A 25-year-old at this point, 20 to 25-year-old is more protective over their time than older people with less of it. And so thinking about some time leverage and how the world of work is going to be in the future is another good thing to think about here. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a sneak peek inside the process of how the platform for the camp stack is going to be connecting the dots. And I'll show you that, and feel free to ask some questions as we go here. The first thing to think about when we're building a workflow is, what is the trigger? So there are 3 significantly different types of triggers, and everything that happens downstream is affected by what type of trigger is firing the workflow. A manual workflow is going to be triggered by some sort of toggle, like a button. Someone actually is logging in and saying, this is the one day of the year where we want to start X. And that might be an end of year cleanup. It might be a beginning of the season data transfer. This is a common use case. This is what we use the school bus manager integration for. We pull data from Campminder, goes into school bus manager for bus stop routing. The camp director does work there. And then when they're ready, they log into the camp stack, click the manual toggle to say, okay, move all of my bus routes and update these 20 fields in Campminder for each camper. And it only happens maybe 3 times in the year, but it saves the camp director a week of their time potentially from manually importing it, or someone that's a highly capable person for a week in May. It's not really the best use of their time. So that's a manual trigger. A scheduled trigger could be anything as simple as a birthday reminder. You could have a whole birthday workflow based off of a camper's birthday if they're enrolled. And so that has the whole set of nuances around something like that. And then an automatic trigger is a better example from that camper sync that I showed you. So in that example, the automatic trigger is when an enrollment status in Campminder is changed to enrolled. And so that would be the trigger to move things forward. There is a step, and there's no way around this. We've tried really hard to make it easy and less technical, so make it kind of a smoother interface and experience for a non-technical director. But you have to decide, do you want all 4 parents? Do you just want P1 from both families? Your camp's history. And so some people just know that they never get P2s. And if they get a P2, they never have an email because they never want them. And so you also know, do you need camper 4s? This is really where in the future the camp stack is going to have even more deeper, nuanced fields that we can access and pull and prepare for you to say, is this person coming to these sessions with these specialties, and looking at programs, because when you layer these things, they get really, really complex. But so there's selecting the data and what you want to do with it. And then the real, engineering muscle that you don't want to have to do in a spreadsheet format, that you would never do in spreadsheet format daily over and over again, is the sorting and sifting of the data. So I've made it very easy, in theory, to say, oh, when a camper enrolls in Campminder, then update them over here. But it's really not that simple when you think about the nuances. And if you've ever committed to moving the data, you've encountered these stumbling blocks. So What happens if they cancel? What happens if one of the kids cancels and the other kids remain enrolled? What if one of the parents switches sessions? And how do you update all of the parents for all the kids that have switched sessions? And so there's a slew of data that could be pulled and used to sort and filter who needs to be pulled in which workflow. And so ultimately, this is where the critical thinking of a camp administrator or registrar or owner operator really needs to be deployed, not so much in learning, how to access the API in my view. So the fields mapping is an example of this. This came up last week. There was a big camp that does they accept 3 or 4 different ways to have your first name, your preferred nickname, etc. They review everyone's application in Campminder and update from a variety of fields. They have custom fields to say, what does your child like to be called? They look at all of those fields and they update preferred nickname in Campminder. And when they manually transport that for now, but we're gonna automate that away. When that preferred nickname becomes first name in the email tool. Because if your first name on your birth certificate is Beatrice, but you go by B and you really hate it if people call you Beatrice, this is the sort of intention that matters. So our assertion at the Camp Stack is that this is where the empathy and thinking and critical thinking and strategy of communications really this is the future. All right, so what does that look like if you are not doing this all in Postman and pulling APIs and trying to do it all in there in Zapier? And so we've built a platform that's not fully live in the wild yet, but where we'll be able to collect credentials and access and hold on to your API keys as a user, or you will be able to authenticate within the Camp Stack. You'll be able to build a workflow and choose, is it manual or is it scheduled or is it happening on an event automatically? And you will be able to select what data you want to pull or get, and without having to do JSON and the technical stuff. We have this go-between where those hidden columns we pull for you. And so you'll be able to lay out exactly what you want to do and bring it to the next destination. So whether this is a Google Sheet because you're just a Google Sheet wizard and you want to be able to run pivot tables and have them update automatically when someone enrolls and to see how many kids are going to be in certain cabins, that's up to you. So that's what it will look like. That's sort of a sample of what the experience will be like when people can build their own workflows. For the moment, we're building workflows for camps as we develop and refine and build the platform. I just want to reiterate why this is, a timely, relevant, worthwhile pursuit. As there are 3 sort of mountains I want to reference. One is, the mountain of things to do right now for most camps is pretty small, but everybody remembers, unless you have a severe case of campnesia, you remember how stressed and taxed for time you were in the spring. And so this is without a doubt something that cannot be kind of launched in a hurry in the spring when you need it. So now is the time to think about how you're going to buy back time in the future for yourself. There's something this phrase, I have this kind of running joke with one of the camp directors I speak with regularly, that the reason why he automates things with workflows is so he can do stress-free skiing in the winter. And just know that when someone cancels or enrolls or becomes a lead, the data is flowing and he just gets to look at his dashboard and be very happy. I also want to bring up, remember when everybody had to become an epidemiologist and deal with everything through COVID? There's becoming an API expert is a little bit of a kind of a shiny object potentially. A lot of other camp directors I know have this around Adobe Photoshop and becoming a designer because there's time now in the fall and it's like a great fun activity, which is totally cool. Um, but I would consider, that's likely never going to be the case when you need to fix something about enrolled or canceled updates happening in June. Um, I thought this was a fun road ahead reference for those of you that have been to many Campminder camps. In the last 2.5 years, 3 years, what we've experienced is that one workflow done well usually leads down the road. So very quickly, people want to build their camper sync worked out well. Maybe they want to have a derivative of if an app is incomplete or canceled, they want to send down a different workflow. They definitely have jumped on staff syncs, staff workflows. Staffing is the new camper recruitment. Some have said in the last year because it's been harder to get, or post COVID, it was harder to get staff than kids. And additionally, once you start thinking about workflows, you can start seeing deeper into the future and around corners to say what you want to look and pull. Perhaps it's a dashboard, perhaps it's you want a daisy chain, a camper sync to send, parent and camper info to Bonjoro because you have a program person that's going to send them a Bonjoro and they're totally disconnected. They're, on a study abroad semester, but they're going to get updates in Bonjoro, send the videos, and you don't actually have to touch it to remind them. So that's one workflow to 5. The road ahead also includes deep integrations for us. There's so many Easter egg fields in Campminder that some people don't know exists unless you've gone and stumbled across them, spoken to somebody at support that has, deep knowledge and has explained. Even things like enrolled siblings, sessions and things like that. There's fields that are really helpful to the right people. So creating these deeper integrations to get the most out of Campminder and bring it somewhere else. And having more platforms. So in addition to MailChimp, Constant Contact, Blackbaud, School Bus Manager, all of the kind of key ones, Bloomerang, and all these other fundraising platforms that a lot of people want. Anyways, there's really not going to be, similar to how a camp menu is all the same in the dining hall. They're really never actually all the same. They're similar, but they're all very different. And then lastly, there's some people want to go way faster than they can even learn. And so sometimes they just want us to do it all for them. And that'll probably always be a potential. And so the idea that you can do this for yourself or have it done for you is going to be a real possibility in the near future. So thank you for sticking around. Those of you that are still here. A couple people messages saying they had to go. I'll stop now and open it up for questions. If anybody has any, you can drop them in the Q&A and I will follow up and chat about them or send you a text live. All right, you're very welcome, Jeremy. Thank you. Thanks for sticking around. Right. What would the pricing be if we wanted you to help build this for us? Abby, I would love to tell you a specific price right now, but it's a very dangerous proposition there because if you told me you wanted Campminder to constant contact, but sorted in a couple lists, I could probably give you an answer. Our normal setup is around $750 as a one-time setup, and then it's $125 monthly going forward. And that's for us to make sure it's managed and you get the assurance that it's working, and we fix it for you. I assume you're so Abby, but many people often say, oh yeah, and then could you also send it to Blackbaud and then update this and then send them a postcard? So, but those the general loose parameter would be starting at 750 and 125 a month. Meredith says, I assume you're able to connect with Sign Up Genius. Sign Up Genius is definitely a possibility. I don't know if we've done that yet, but I know for a fact that they have an API that would be easy to send to. It would just take a little bit of lead time. And this is kind of how we're building out the platform, is that as the requests for specific platforms and other tools are, brought online, as soon as you bring us the request, it's relatively easy for us to say if it's possible and then build it. Yes, Mandy, that's a great question. I don't know if we have a complete up to date list at this moment available on the website, but I can, we'll follow up. If you're probably the only Mandy that showed up today, we'll follow up and I'll send you an email of all of the existing stuff that you could turn on really quickly. That's a good question. We can definitely do that. Henry, we make a note. We can talk about that later, but that's great. Thank you for that, Mandy. Perfect. Great. I will send a note. Thank you, Mandy. Great. So any additional questions? The only other thing I wanted to share is that thecampstack.com, you can learn more. The best email for me personally is eric@campermachine.com or eric@thecampstack.com, ERIC. And if anybody else has any other questions, I'll stick around for another couple of minutes here. Says thank you. You're very welcome, Phil. Good. I know we're going to talk a little bit later. Thank you. Appreciate that, Phil. I assume yes. Okay. All right. I see people dropping. We're good with our questions. Well, thanks so much, gang, and we'll be sending out the recording also. So in case you want to forward it with somebody that you think should see it, you'll be able to do that too. All right. Thanks, gang. All right. So long. Bye-bye. Thanks for checking out the Camper Machine podcast. You can learn more about marketing automation at campermachine.com and connecting your camp software at thecampstack.com.